I thank you for joining us here tonight. Soul Journeys on AmericanFreedomRadio.com. We have an exciting show in store for you tonight. We're going to kick it off in the first hour with Dr. Peter Breggin, also known as the Conscience of Psychiatry. It is such an honor to have you back here tonight, Dr. Breggin. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm just looking forward to talking to you.
Oh,
you're becoming an old friend in my life, Christie.
You teach us so much, and I really respect and honor what you're doing, leading the way. I mean, you really put your career in jeopardy, speaking out against psychiatric treatment. And, of course, you've been able to sustain yourself and teach people all over the world. So I really appreciate you. You're definitely one of my heroes.
Well, thank you so much. It is amazing to have been doing reform work since I was 18 years old for more than 50 years now. It's just amazing to think back on it all, because there were times when I sure didn't know if I'd survive professionally or even if I would live.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's just amazing looking back on it. One thing it makes me want to say to your marvelous audience, which is, live by your principles. Anyone listening to this show has strong principles. Be brave. You'll never look back and regret it.
Absolutely, and you are definitely proof of that. I just want to say, we've had Dr. Breggin on in the past for several hours, so, unfortunately, only having you for an hour here, we're not going to talk about the whole history of psychiatry and all of this tonight, so just please go back and check out the archives if you want more of that. We're going to kind of focus on solutions, because we get those questions all the time. Well, I know they're not so good for me, but what do I do now? We hear about the withdrawal symptoms and the things that people go through. So, but if you would, can you kind of give us a Cliff Notes version or, of your background, just in case we have any new listeners that are not familiar with your work?
Well, I got started as an 18-year-old kid, a Harvard freshman. I volunteered for a state mental hospital program that was brand new. Volunteer program, and I ended up running this volunteer program and discovering that untrained kids in college with a little bit of supervision could do a lot more good than all the psychiatrists and nurses and aides in the hospital. We actually got patients out of the hospital whom they had given up on. So it just was very early clear to me that the answer wasn't pills and drugs, shock treatment, and all that the answer was in human relationship. And even, I don't know why I knew it then, but even loving relationship and empathic, caring relationship. And from there I went into psychiatry, little dreaming that by the time I was finished med school, psychiatry would have gotten worse and worse instead of better and better. So that the awful stuff I saw in the state mental hospital of drugging everybody was now what was being done everywhere in society. Yeah. And that psychiatry had actually gotten less friendly toward caring, empathic approaches. So I found myself thinking, well, I guess I won't be the youngest president of the American Psychiatric Association. I'm just going to go and do therapy and do the things I believe in. And then in 1971 and 2, I found out lobotomy was coming back. I got so upset about it, Christie, that I organized an international campaign which stopped almost all the projects in Europe and North America and even many around the world. I worked with Congress. I worked with the media. So I became a reformer. So about half of my life over these years has been this, volunteer reformer, and the other half has been doing therapy and writing the books, and I do a lot of legal work, which is one of the ways that I sustain myself. I do legal work on behalf usually of injured patients, but on behalf of really anyone who has a legitimate suit in my field.
You testify quite a bit, as a medical expert in criminal malpractice and product liability suits, right?
Yeah, and in criminal cases, I will go to court if I feel that a psychiatric drug has driven somebody over the edge and pushed them to do things they never would have done normally. Then I will go and testify on behalf of them in a criminal case. Or if I feel they've been negligently treated and harmed, I would go to court in a malpractice case. And on occasion, if they are suing a drug company for negligent drug testing or marketing, then I would participate as a medical expert in those kinds of cases.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. I have a very, very interesting life. My main problem right now is it's busier than it's ever been, and I'm not getting all the writing time I wanted. But that's marvelous, I'm just still balancing my life. It's, if you love what you're doing and you're working on principles and you have God's blessings, you get to work for all your life.
And a lovely wife behind you.
Oh, God, Ginger makes
all your efforts.
Ginger makes all the difference in the world. I genuinely believe that she is here and I'm here with her. That it was meant to be. That it wasn't just our own doing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, now, how many, I can't keep up with all of your books and DVDs, so how many do you have to date?
Well, the books are somewhat over 20. Some of them are revisions, but certainly over 20 books. And the most recent book is the first that is focused on the issue of how do you help somebody get off the drug. So the book is in two parts. It's the first part is a review of a lot of the latest data on how harmful the drugs are. I mean, we now have studies showing that a number of drugs dramatically shorten the lifespan.
We sure do.
The antipsychotic drugs may be taking 10 or 15 years off people's lives.
Wow.
There's a study that even, and this was hard for me to believe, that even prescribed sleeping medications will increase mortality over a couple of years by several times. Mm-hmm. So we're just finding out more and more. We're finding out about abnormal cell growth from these drugs. We're finding out about cell death. We're finding out about shrinkage of the brain. So the first part of the book is about the whole problem. And I introduce and explain two of my new concepts that have appeared in the scientific literature, and one of them in other books, but one brand new in a book. And the new one is chronic brain impairment, that the brain gets impaired from these processes, and this is how you tell if you or your loved one is developing chronic brain impairment. The other concept is medication spellbinding, which is that you will be the last to know, very likely, just how much you've been hurt by the drug, because judgment about ourselves gets impaired by the drugs. So very often it's your loved one who's going to say, you're just not enthusiastic about anything anymore. It's been years since you wanted to play golf, and you don't seem as interested even in the dogs, and God knows, we haven't hugged in a loving way in a while. And that loss of interest, which is one of the things that happens with chronic drug exposure, maybe somebody else may notice it first, or that your memory isn't working as well. Again, you might notice that, but it may be your children who say, "Daddy, don't you remember what I told you yesterday? Or didn't I tell you Mommy called?" And you'll be confused about it. Or you'll be more irritable, more angry. Your moods just won't be quite under your control as well. And again, somebody else will notice it rather than you. So I try to draw this picture and understanding of the hazards around the drugs. And then the second half is about how do you come off them. And I present what's a person-centered approach, a patient-centered approach, that the most important thing is that you have to be in control of the process. Now, that's quite radical, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Prescribing
yeah,
doctors
often
like
we're told, oh, well, you're mentally ill, so your opinion doesn't matter, right?
Well, that's right. That's right. Or even if you're not crazy, you're still a patient, and I'm the doctor.
Yeah.
And this book is, I'm trying to tell doctors that they are going to do better and feel better prescribing physicians, nurse practitioners, and physicians' assistants, and everybody from psychiatrists to nurse practitioners and GPs and so on. Now, you're going to feel better if you really start focusing on your patients and what they really want, so that when they come in and say they don't feel the drug is helping, you don't double it. You think maybe the drug's actually hurting them. You really listen, and you don't load people up with drugs in large numbers, and you don't tell people, to take them for the rest of your lives because it's not good for people. And Christie, there are no rest of your life studies, so it's made up to say that you can take them for the rest of your life. So, I'm just saying, look, you don't have to be hurt by sharing your power and your authority and collaborating with the patient, collaborating with the therapist, collaborating with the family. And so I've written the book so that, do you hear my little Sheltie barking in the background?
Hi, little baby.
She's 9 months old. She's 9 months old.
Aww.
And she's completely disrupting the show. But
we can bring her on.
She's come on to the show, obviously. She's decided to come on the show. But she's such a sweetheart, and she has so perked up our lives. It's so interesting. We've never been sure how to spend evenings unwinding because we work so hard. And this little girl has perked us up and our older dog. We have an older Sheltie sheepdog, and this little one. And she's just brought life into the evening. She runs and jumps and barks like this and gets on the bed. She get the old dog up on a bed with her, and so we have quite a time with her.
Well, I'm glad she's joining us tonight. And I don't know about you, but my dog is definitely smarter than me, so I'm going to hand the microphone off to Snickers.
There you go. We'll let the dogs do the show. I had this fantasy that, I do this, and we'll get back to this stuff in a minute, but I love just talking with you. I have this fantasy that when I do my conference, every April we have a conference for anybody who wants to come, professionals, non-professionals, patients. I have this fantasy that I'm going to open the conference, as I always do, and I'm going to say, people are always saying to me, if you're not doing the psychiatric stuff and the drugs and you don't have all these professionals doing it, what are you going to offer? And I'm going to pick up my new little Sheltie, who's really a tiny Sheltie, and say, a therapy dog.
Absolutely. I mean, hasn't it been proven that animals help us in our recovery, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. And some of them actually do very specific things, like warn patients when they're going to have a seizure. Nobody knows how. So they have special powers. Believe it. Believe it, they have special powers. And so do we. And I think to come back to the idea of therapy again, you really want the person who feels most empowered to be not the doctor, not even the therapist, the non-medical therapist, not the family. The whole point is to empower the individual who feels so vulnerable that they're thinking of themselves as a patient. You want to empower yourself or your loved one who's feeling like a patient.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Breggin, I'm sorry it's that time, so hold that right there. We will continue this after this short break. Stay tuned, everyone. Dr. Peter Breggin here on SoulJourneysRadio.com. Yeah, how dangerous are these drugs? I mean, it seems like despite the proof and all the evidence and studies and lawsuits and everything out there, the numbers are still increasing. Why is that?
Oh, boy, is that a huge question, but a suitable one for your show. Yeah, let me say, if you take something like Prozac and you look at the studies, or any of the antidepressants, it's almost impossible to prove they're helpful. Even in the studies done by their own hired doctors. I mean, because the studies that are done to and sent to the FDA for drug approval, they're totally organized by the drug companies. They hire their own docs, and then they do the data evaluation right at the drug company office. There's no independent doctors involved. It's all drug company stuff. And it's practically impossible to show that antidepressants really do help, and it's easy to show that they cause suicidality and they cause violence, mania, agitation, anxiety, insomnia, weight gain, and long-term, I think the evidence is increasing that they make people into lifelong depressives if they stay on them their whole lives. Commonly do that. So what keeps this system going? Well, I think there's 2 or 3 ways to look at that. One thing that keeps it going, and probably the biggest factor, certainly the biggest factor, is drug company money. The money is poured into the system so that the media won't criticize the drugs, the government supports the drugs, NIH, NIMH, all the government agencies support the drugs. The insurance companies mistakenly think that drugs are cheaper than therapy when the drugs are costing them a lot of other money in terms of people hospitalized from drug reactions, people not getting better. The AMA and the American Psychiatric Association and the Pediatric Association and even the American Neurological Association, they all want to support the drugs because they bring in income. They bring in easy income to the individual practitioners. So there's all these huge forces, but it starts with the flooding of the system with drug company money. But then there's the other side of this issue, which is so appropriate to your show, which is the emptiness of values that so many of us have in our culture, that we're vulnerable to wanting a quick cure. And this has been lost on religious leaders, Christians, Jews, Jewish leaders. It's been lost totally on the university academicians who by and large, love psychiatry. And people forget that what life is about is the struggle, is confronting the anxiety and the sadness and the loss, and learning how to find rock-solid values and rock-solid viewpoints with which we can deal with life. And, of course, they never do get rock-solid. That's the problem. Life keeps coming at us. But one way of looking at it is that our society, even spiritual and religious people, would rather think that a drug is their last resort rather than God or love or family. Because when you go to your minister and you tell him you're really feeling down and maybe suicidal, and the minister says, I think you should see the psychiatrist, the minister, in effect, is saying, we're just for the softballs here. We don't play hardball spiritually. You better go to the psychiatrist. And then what is the psychiatrist saying? Even if the psychiatrist is a church-going or temple-going guy or girl, woman, by giving you a diagnosis and a drug, the psychiatrist is saying there's a materialistic philosophy which supersedes spirituality. There's a materialistic viewpoint masquerading as science that says depression is a biochemical imbalance, we'll give you a drug, which is just all made up. Or that your child's behavior problems are caused by a disorder called ADHD rather than you haven't learned to discipline your child, or you haven't learned to engage your child in school, or the school is failing to engage your child. So instead of the most fundamental values in society, which are, family life, raising children, love between husband and wife, good values, creative work, and ultimately when we're at the pits, we turn to God. And hopefully we actually turn to him all day long, but we turn to God. Well, no, we turn to the drug. So instead of 10 times a day reminding ourselves to be grateful to God, or I believe in psychotherapy, or learning about our childhood and learning where we got bad ideas from, bad attitudes from. Instead of doing something spiritual and psychological during the day, we're going to take a drug 4 times a day and watch our emotional ups and downs in terms of the drug and tinker with the drug and tinker with the drug. Or give the drug to our kids and tinker with the kids' drug and get them a little more of this and a little more of that and so on and so forth. So we literally are substituting engagement with life, with family, with a spiritual life. We're substituting that with tinkering with a drug. It's not a lot different, and I've gotten very criticized for saying this years ago, but now people are beginning to understand I'm right. It's not a lot different than turning to alcohol when you turn to a psychiatric drug, or turning to many of the same drugs we give our kids. Adults are addicted to amphetamine, and cocaine is very similar to what we give our kids. I mean, all drugs undercut our spirituality because they dull our highest organic centers that we need to express our spirituality. So I really believe we need a real revolution in how we think of ourselves as human beings. And we've lost track of it.
Yeah, I am so glad you brought up the chemical imbalance. I'll just call it a myth here, because I know that's one of the things we're taught. But
it's a myth. I have a new video on that. We had 3,000 folks watch it very shortly after it was put up, and it's free. It's on biochemical imbalances. You can see it. Look it up under my videos on Breggin.com. But I'm sorry, I'm talking so much, and I'm already hoarse. So.
No, you're doing great. I'm glad you brought that up, because somebody asked a question about that in the chat, like literally 30 seconds before you brought that up. So what is the truth? I mean, I know we're told, oh, well, you're depressed because you have a chemical imbalance, but have they actually ever proved that?
No, it's a lie.
Yeah.
It's a lie fabricated initially in the drug company PR offices. In the case of Prozac, which was where this all began full speed, they were sending doctors around talking about biochemical imbalances being corrected by Prozac before the FDA had even approved the drug. And actually what they knew from their laboratories were that if you give Prozac, and this is true for any psychiatric drug, if you give Prozac to a normal animal, usually a rat, you cause a biochemical imbalance.
Yeah, okay, so they make you think that you have a chemical imbalance, which is why you need it. And again, no scientific evidence has ever proven that. But on the contrary, they have actually proven that the chemical imbalances they refer to happen only after you take those drugs.
Exactly.
Oy.
And now they're reaching a new level of evil because they're finding long-term that people who take these drugs literally start to lose brain cells, sometimes measurable on MRIs with shrinkage of the brain, and also people from some of these drugs are getting abnormal cell growth, new cell growth, which is a response to damage and which is abnormal cells. And they're now claiming this is from the illness.
Yeah.
This is because you had ADHD when you were 12. That is, you didn't like school when you were 12.
Yeah, big deal. Or you wanted to play in the mud. Big deal. Oh, my gosh. I can't believe, Dr. Breggin, of course, when I was a child and a preteen, I was accused of the same mental illness and need, for drugs. And I'm telling you, that whole brain cell thing is definitely true. But I wish I knew who you were 30 years ago, of course. But, it's just a shame people aren't being taught the truth, and they're actually causing the problem that they say they're curing. Now, another interesting fact about these antidepressants and other brain disabling treatments isn't it true that there was no violence, homicide, or suicide associated with depression and bipolar and anxiety and such until after these drugs had hit the market?
No, that would be an exaggeration because people who get depressed have often gotten suicidal and even committed suicide.
Okay.
But the rates have gone up in areas we can measure. For example, in the military, where that's the newest market, the large percentage of military on psychiatric drugs. This is crazy. People in combat on psychiatric drugs. This is all new. This is the last few years, only since the Iraq War. And so we're getting increased suicide rates that are proportional, roughly, to the rise in the psychiatric drugs being given to the soldiers. And it is true that depression rarely leads to violence turned against others. It's usually against yourself. But these drugs do encourage violence against others. And it's true that some of the most horrific violent acts in our culture, Eric Harris at Columbine High, he was on antidepressant, Luvox. And the bizarre...
Or what if Cho and all the rest of them, the Virginia Tech shootings?
Well, we never got enough information, but notice he did have psychiatric treatment.
Wow, okay.
And we're seeing the same thing in the shooter in Aurora. We know he had psychiatric treatment. We're not being told about the drugs. But, hardly anybody goes and gets psychiatric treatment without drugs.
Yeah, I mean, the psychiatrists, at least in my experience, when I was a teenager, you would spend, maybe 2 or 3 minutes with them, and they'd write a prescription. You'd go to a therapist, of course, to do your talking, but not, the psychiatric treatment. Yeah. In my experience was just, giving them a drug. And then you go back, and it's like, well, I don't really feel so good. Oh, okay, well, here, let's up your dose. The next week, let's change it to something else entirely. And, this never-ending cycle. And the funny thing is, I forget the name of the movie, Dr. Breggin, but I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, where a guy, he did a documentary, and he went to, say, 12 or so different psychologists, complained about the exact same symptoms, and ended up with 12 or 13 totally different diagnoses. So I'd love to talk about how people are even being diagnosed in the first place, but I hear the music, so we'll have to save that till after this short break. Stay tuned, everyone. Dr. Peter Breggin here on SoulJourneysRadio.com. Doctor, if you would, I'd like to touch on really quickly how people are diagnosed, the DSM, and then perhaps the remainder of the segment we can move into your approach and what people can do to wean themselves off of these drugs if they find themselves in this situation.
Well, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM, is written by committee. That should tell you something at the start. So there's a committee for emotional disorders, or called affective disorders, committee for psychosis, a committee for childhood. And the one thing that almost all the committee members have in common is, guess what? They work for drug companies.
The
data we have from the last DSM is that in a couple of the critical areas, which were the areas that deal with depression and psychosis, where a lot of drugs are given out, every committee member was related to the drug companies. So, it's a justification for giving drugs. The new DSM that's supposed to come out just before next May is going to try to, it's going to say that if you have been in bereavement for 4 weeks, it's a mental disorder.
Isn't that
give you 4 weeks. I know people who have grieved their lost animals for months and months.
Yeah?
People
That's totally
care.
Normal.
It's just... But you see, if they can claim that, then they have all this new excuse for giving drugs. That's what it's all about.
So basically, it's a list of, or a set of symptoms. Each diagnosis is a set of, or what they call symptoms, which are pretty much most of the time just normal behavior issues, like, restless leg syndrome. Okay, so you shake your leg a little bit because you're nervous sitting in class for 6 hours a day and bored.
Yep. Yeah, they take ordinary human experience and carve it up and try to say which pieces are abnormal. Now, everyone experiences depression in a lifetime, sadness, loss, grief, unless you haven't lived. Everyone experiences anxiety and fear and agitation and so on. So what they do then is, and this is actually in the style that most of your listeners are too young to remember, of the old Chinese restaurant menus. They took this style from the Chinese restaurant menus, which is you can take one from A and one from B and one from C. So, you sort of pick through a whole bunch of different items and take your pick out of different groups, and if you got a certain number of this or that, all made up out of some guy's head, then you call it a disease. And the more they can make it common, the happier the drug company sponsors are, the happier the Psychiatric Association is, the happier the psychiatrists are, make a living, they can do better. It's that bad. It's that bad.
So it's a list of behaviors that somebody decided, we're going to call this wrong, but is there any scientific evidence behind the information found in the DSM?
Not behind the idea of whether something is too severe or not. That's all up to human beings to decide what level of sadness they think is proper for their lives or what level of anxiety. It's very, very little science. Now, you can say that they do have a list of things that are common in people who go through severe trauma and get labeled post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, people who go through that, they relive the experiences, they have nightmares, they get hyper, they can get easily, stimulated by anything threatening. It's sort of like, when my wife and I were walking two of our Shelties years ago, neither of these two that I have now, and a lightning bolt hit the metal post that was right next to us when we were walking. There was no difference between the flash and the sound, and we all, for weeks, and the dogs forever, had post-traumatic stress disorder every time there was a thunderstorm. Now, what is that? That's a normal reaction of a normal brain and person to extreme fear. So your soldier comes back from war, and it's got all these things. We do learn what some of the characteristics are of going through stress. But do you want to call that a disease and give drugs? A, the drugs make things worse because they compromise your brain further. And B, the soldier needs to be told you're having the reaction of a normal person with a normal brain to unusual stress, and probably everybody in combat has some of this.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's how you approach the whole problem.
Definitely. Dr. Breggin, we unfortunately only have about 5 minutes left, so I'd like for, let's talk about your approach, how you have been literally changing thousands of lives, since you've been in this business. Let's say I come to you and say I've been on, a different cocktail of all of these brain-disabling drugs for the past 20 years, and I just came across your information and the studies proving how harmful they are. How would you help me? Well,
the first thing to do is you make a relationship. Because what people need when they go through stress, and coming off psychiatric drugs can be a severe stress. Not always, but it can be a very severe stress. So you want to have a relationship. You want to trust me. You want to talk with me long enough to see that you like me, that you think I'm interested in you. We develop a relationship. And then give some of the information that's in the book about what the risks are of staying on the drug, and also the information in the book about, for your particular drug, what are the risks of coming off of it. But the big emphasis would be on, we're going to go at your pace, and we're going to involve, if you've been on these drugs for years, we're going to involve somebody you care about. Mother, father, brother, sister, friend, somebody you go to AA with, whoever you have. We're going to involve them, because when you come off psychiatric drugs, it can be a very dangerous time, because your poor brain's been exposed to these drugs, it's gotten used to these drugs, has changed to accommodate these drugs. So as you come off of them, you've got a changed brain and no longer the drugs.
Yeah.
So you may go wacky. You may get disturbed. You may get anxious. Now, some drugs will tend to produce one thing or another thing, but it's also very unpredictable. And because your brain's going to be experiencing the withdrawal from the drug, and because you may also, as you withdraw, get more aware of harm that's been done to you because you're clearer now, you're not drugged, you realize how bad your memory got, you hadn't realized it on the drugs, you may get really upset. But the odd thing about drugs is they always tend to prevent us from knowing the harm they're doing. So the alcoholic thinks they can drive better than ever. The person smoking marijuana thinks their jokes are funnier than ever. And it's just not true. And so when you're coming off the drugs, you may, for example, get very angry at your wife and think you're justified and forget that I've told you that getting angry is one of the things that happens to you coming off the drugs. Your judgment's impaired. So you want to have a partner working with you, maybe who's hopefully read some of the book with you, especially some of the basic portions. If you have a therapist, you want this therapist to not believe in medication compliance. Right now, what social workers and psychologists and nurses and counselors are taught is your job is not to question the drug ever. Your job isn't to research the drug and talk with your patients about it.
And then if you do, there's further proof that you're nuts, right?
Yeah. Your job is to tell your patients to take the drug. Well, I want therapists to stop doing that. You can Google, you can read my book. Read my book, you're going to know more than just about any prescriber knows, because they haven't read that level of disclosure about how harmful the drugs are, or that level of discussion of how to come off the drugs. So read the book, whether you're a therapist, whether you're the patient, the family, and optimally you get the whole team together. Now, a lot of times it's not going to be a psychiatrist, because my colleagues just get mad at the idea of a patient saying, I want to come off my drugs. It makes them very mad. Very often. This is disgrace, but it's true. So it might be that you find a nurse practitioner, or maybe your pediatrician's willing to work with you on your child coming off drugs, or your family doc, and tell them why you want to come off and ask their help in prescribing. If you can find a counselor who won't push the drugs but will help you stay in touch with what's going on.
Absolutely. Dr. Breggin, I'm so sorry. I hear the music. We're out of time. I'm going to see if I can fit a couple quick questions in here, though. In your experience, do you believe that anybody needs these drugs, or that they're helpful to anyone?
I think that there's always a better solution than drinking, smoking dope, smoking cigarettes, or taking psychiatric drugs. There's always a better way than psychoactive substances. If you're going to use them, don't use them for more than a very short time, because all of them are hard to come off and all are bad for your brain.